Hello there everyone, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this laced edge wire Kumihimo bracelet. Now as you can see here, I've made several different versions, so I both mixed up the colours in the wire, but also you can choose to either add beads or not, so you get very different looks. So if you want to learn how to make your own, then keep watching. So these are then the materials we're going to need, and first of all we need our wire, of course. So what I have first of all is a copper wire here of 0.8mm. This is going to be the wire we're making the braid with. And then here my silver coated copper wire is a 0.6mm, and this is going to make the embellishment along the edges. Of course you can mix your colours however you want to. And these are then the rest of the tools and materials that we're going to need. Now first of all I have my Kumihimo disc, of course, and it's a square one because we're making a flat braid. And also to help make the braid, I'm going to be using this electrical tape, and this is to help keep the wires together in the beginning. And to finish off the braid, I'm using these ribbon ends here that have loops in them so we can attach our findings. So I've got an extended chain, a little claw clasp, and of course some jump rings. And it's optional if you want to add beads, but of course if you do, you will also need your beads. Now the ones that I'm using here are some Swarovski bicones. And I just think they work really well for this design because they add a lovely sparkle to the piece. But of course you can use whatever beads that you want to. Now don't forget, I'm going to leave the material list and any links that might be helpful for you in the description box down below the video. Otherwise, let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. So then the lengths of wires that we'll need is first of all here 8 lengths of our 0.8mm, and these are about 35 centimeters long, and we're going to use these to make the braid with first of all. So I then laid all my wires flat next to each other here and then put some tape around the ends, and then just bent the very ends of the wire back over the tape there just so they don't pull through. And then I'm going to now attach these wires here to my disc. So we get a disc out here, and then I'm just going to put the end with the tape on down through the center, and then just grab hold of it on the other side, so on the back of the disc, and then just have it just sticking up there in the hole. And then we just need to distribute the wires. Now we have 8 lengths, so I'm going to put 4 in the middle slots on the top and 4 in the middle slots on the bottom. So I'm just starting from one side, take that to the top, then the next one, take that to the bottom, and continue next one to the top, and next one to the bottom. And because of this braid structure that we're going to be doing, I like to kind of have this be the midpoint and then go in reverse the other way, so it's kind of mirrored from each other, the two sides. So this one I take to the bottom as well, and then the top, and then the bottom, and then the top. And now you can see we have all our wires into slots, and they are on in the 4 middle ones opposite each other. And just get it all in position here. And then we have on the back just the end here with the tape sticking out for now. Obviously the braid is going to be growing there, but for now we just have that, and I'm just holding on to that underneath the disc with my thumb and my finger like that. And we have the disc now ready to start making our braid. So the structure that we're going to be doing here is a cross Kumihimo braid structure. And obviously because we're working with wire, that is quite different than if you're making a braid like this with cord. It's the same basic technique, but obviously the wire reacts differently. So what I'm going to do is we need to start from the top side of the disc, and we need to use the 2 middle ones first. So I'm just starting with the right one of the 2 middle ones, and I release that. And what I always like to do when I move my wire here is when I've released my length from a slot, I run it through my fingers, my hands, just to first of all softens it up and warms it up so it's a bit easier to work with, but also smooth out that kink that you inevitably get when you add it into the slot there. You can see you will always get a kind of little bend to it. You just want to smooth that out before we then move it into the next position. This one then, the right one of the 2 middle ones, needs to go over towards the left side, and I also push down in the middle a little bit to kind of help the wire along the way, and place it into the slot straight out to that left side there. Now I'm going to do the same but with the left one of the two middle ones on the top. Release it before I move anything. Just smooth it out so we get rid of that little bend. And then bring it over towards the right. And instead of just bringing it over like this, because like you would do with cord, just loosely and then placing it, that's how you get very kind of loose and a bit messy braid most of the time. So what I do is, to avoid that, obviously if you want to, is I kind of pull it a little bit to the side using a little bit of strength, and then I use my index finger to help push down in the middle, and then I place it into the slot on the side. So we moved those two. Now we need to move the bottom and the top ones to opposite sides basically. So I'm just going to start, imagine that you have a line down through the center of your disc. So we have a left side and a right side. Out of the two middle ones on the bottom here, I'm going to take the left one, just starting with that. And again, just smooth it out. And then here, I'm using my thumb, kind of bracing it under the wire. And as I'm moving my wire over towards the top, I'm also kind of pushing down with my thumb in the middle there. And doing it this way just helps makes the braid tighter. Move to the next one out on the top. Bring that down, and now I'm just using my index finger to do basically the same thing. Down into the empty slot on the bottom. And then smooth out the next one when you released it. Bring it up and over into the empty slot on the top that was just released from the previous movement. So we now moved all the ones on the left side. Now to get to the right, do the same thing. So release the right one of the two middle ones there. Just smooth it out. Use your thumb as we bring it up. Place it into the empty slot on the top. And then move one out towards the right here. Smooth out the wire. Bring it down. Remember to kind of push against in the middle. Empty slot on the bottom. Next one out. Run it through your hands and fingers. And push against the middle with a thumb as you're moving it up to the empty slot on the top. So we now moved all the top and the bottom wires there to opposite sides. Now what we need to do is these two wires on the side, we need to bring them back into the braid. So it doesn't matter what side you start with, I'm just going to take the right one because I already have that hand ready. Release the wire. Smooth it out, and then as I'm bringing this down, I like to use my index finger and kind of push against the sides of the braid a little bit. Obviously right now we don't really have much braid done because this is the first round, but I'm just doing the same technique throughout, just kind of getting the habit, and you can end up more or less going on autopilot at some point. And then obviously place it in that empty slot on the bottom. So we end up with the 4 wires back down here, just like they were before we started this round. Same thing with the left one. Release it, smooth it, and bring it down. And we now are back to having 4 wires on the top and 4 wires on the bottom in the middle slots, straight opposite each other. So this was one round of the braid structure. And basically now what you want to do is just keep repeating this. So starting the next one. I'm always making sure out of those 2 middle ones on the top, I'm starting with the same side every time. It will more or less probably become natural to you. You'll find you have a natural one that you start with, so just keep doing that, but just make sure that you do. So I'm taking that right one of the 2 middle ones, bringing it out to the left, doing all the same things that I was doing before, smoothing wires out, pushing against in the middle there, and then we need to move the bottom and the top ones. So I take just my bottom one first of all, bring that up to the top because that's where the empty slots are. Remember, doing one side at a time. Always using your fingers there in the middle to get the braid nice and tight. And kind of basically, you could say falsing where we want the wire to go rather than where it would go if we just did it loosely, like if it was cord. And the last one, And then just finishing off this round by bringing the side ones back in to the braid. And also by doing the side ones here where I like to kind of gently tug at the wire and then push, like I showed you before, against the side of the braid. That also helps tighten it up a little bit. And down to the bottom, and we're back to having 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom, and this was another 4 round. So now you basically just want to keep repeating this over and over until you then get a length of braid coming out of the bottom here, and you just want to keep moving your fingers where you're gripping around the braid as it's growing here. Just keep your fingers up right below the hole there. So it's just going to move up the braid. And if you're not too comfortable or too sure about wire Kumihimo yet, then I do have a detailed tutorial on the basic tips and tricks and how I find the best way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is leave a link to that in the description box down below. That might be helpful for you. But otherwise, then like I said, just keep making the braid here, repeat round after round until we used up all the wires. So now I've finished making my braid here. Once you've done your full length, you can easily remove it from your disc without worrying about the braid coming undone, as you can see here, because obviously it's the wire, so it will hold its shape nicely. And this is now the finished braid. To then add the embellishment along the edges of the braid, we need to cut some lengths of a 0.6mm wire, and I have 6 lengths of about 30 centimeters each. We need 3 for each side. So again, grabbing our braid here, you'll find that there's kind of a front and a back to this. So if you feel it, you'll find that one side is a bit flatter than the other side. And the flatter side is, in my opinion, the front. So that's what I like to keep as the front of the piece. Well, obviously it's completely up to you. But then what we need to do is, with the lengths that we just cut off, we need to start attaching these to the braid. So I'm just going to work on one side at a time. So just start with 3 lengths, because like I said, it's 3 for either side. And just start on one end of the braid. Now I haven't cut off the ends yet or anything. I'm just going to do that once I've done the embellishment as well. But what we then need to do is attach, because I start with one length of 0.6mm. So I'm just going to basically choose a point where I'm going to start. So I'm just starting on the top side here, and what you'll find is on the braid, because obviously this is wire and not cord, you will find you have little kind of gaps and holes in the braid, which is now what we're going to use to feed. If you can then see here, I'm actually using those, this is on the outer edge, to feed the 0.6mm length through. And that's exactly how we're going to add the embellishment. So starting on the one end here, I'm coming from behind and adding the length through one of those little outer gaps. And we just need a short little length there. Don't need to leave too much. It's literally just to kind of be able to bend it back and kind of grab onto it, because then my length is now coming out of the back here. What I then want to do is bring it around and towards the front side, and then you'll see we have, this is the gap we just went through. I'm then going to move to the next gap just to the right. I'm moving up the braid here, the length of the braid, one gap at a time. For now, I'm going to go straight through there from front towards the back, and you can see the wire is then looping around the side of the braid, and then just pull that, and I'm just holding on to that very little end of the wire here, and pull that until it basically slots in to the outer edge of the braid there, just perfectly. And this is now the first length of a 0.6mm wires attached. So for now I'm just going to leave that there. I'm then going to grab my next length, and then the gap that we just went through is where that wire is coming out from. I'm going to go through the next one. Again, this is from the back to the front, and just leave that short little tail, just bend it back and out of the way just so we can hold on to it. We're going to finish them off later on, so just leave them out of the way for now. And then because I'm just doing this because this is the beginning where we want them to be kind of secure, these lengths. That's why I'm then bringing the long length around the side towards the front, going through the next gap and pulling the wire tight, because that basically secures that wire more in place. And I now have 2 attached. Like I said, don't mind those ends of the wires. And of course, because like I said, we need 3 on either side, we need the last wire attached as well in the exact same way. So the very next free gap on this edge, outer edge on this side here, go through that gap from back to front, and then bring the long end around the side to go through the next gap, but from front to back. So again, the wire loops around the edge of the braid, and then just tighten it so it nestles into the edge there, so it blends in nicely with the braid itself. And now we have 3 lengths attached to this side. Now I'm just going to work with one side at a time, because if you attach the other lengths to the other side, things and wires are just going to be flying around and be in the way. So like I said, I'm just doing one side at a time. So these wires I'm going to work all the way up in the pattern that I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to go to the other side and basically just repeat the same thing. So then as for the pattern that we need to do, it's just going to basically be weaving these wires in and out of each other, while we then along the way also go through the outer edge of the braid still. So what I'm going to do is the very first length, I'm always going to grab the first length of wire furthest down towards where we started, and I'm going to bring this behind the next wire. So as you can see, I'm going behind that one and then over the last wire. So you grab the first wire, you bring it behind, and you bring it in front, so under and over. And now we need to bring this end of the wire that we're working with through a loop on the outer edge of the braid. Now previously, where mentioned down here when we attached them, we went through the next available loop. Here, because we're now getting into the pattern, the next available loop would be this one here, but I actually want to skip this one. So I'm picking that one, and then I'm going to the next one and going through that. The reason for that is, if you can see here, this actually is the same distance as the distance between the other wires, and that's because we went through an extra loop down here when we attached them for the extra security, whereas here we obviously are not doing that. We just want to go through a loop once because we're now doing the main pattern. So therefore we need to skip a loop between the wires, and I'm bringing this through nice and gently from front to back. And as I'm bringing it tighter and tighter down, you can start to see the shape we're going to get. Now obviously it might not be absolutely perfect straight away, and really this is also up to you how you want this to look. So how open and how wide you want these outer edges to be, so that lace design, or how tight. And also obviously I prefer having a nice loop here, so you can always go in and adjust that, create the shape a little bit better, adjust it if you need to, and decide, basically keep pulling the wire through however much you need to until it has the size that you want it to have. Now I think I just want to pull it a little bit tighter, but not too much. I still want it to be open enough, so obviously you do get the impression of that intertwining of the wires with each other. And then just adjust anything. I do recommend, as much as possible, adjusting things along the way. You can still adjust things at the end, but obviously only to a certain point. So something a bit like this, that's the first one, and I just pulled my wire through here, and I've then brought it up, and you can see the first wire that we were using has now become the last one. So the new first wire is the one down here, which was the second one originally, the middle one. And basically all I'm going to do is now keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So these two, well, all of them are going up and out the way, you could say. Just smooth out the wires when you need to. So going back to the first one, same principle. I'm bringing it under the next one and over the next one after that. So under and over, just like we did before. And then I'm not pulling it all the way tight just yet, because I might as well do that as we bring in the wire through. So the very next open gap is this one. Remember, skip that and go through the one after that. So go through the second gap in the outer edge, like that, and then just from front to back, and then just slowly pull it through, because you also want to try and avoid pulling it too far and it getting too tight there. Then you'll have to kind of try and pull it back out and adjust it, but then just gradually bring it further down. And then my aim is to obviously make this as even throughout the whole thing as possible along the way of the side of the braid. So I want this to match the first one as much as possible, which means I need to pull it through more, kind of make the loop smaller, you could say, or tighter. And then you can help with pliers if you need to adjust anything. Until you're pretty happy with how it looks. Now, personally, my opinion, it doesn't matter if the first one is a bit tighter than the rest. So if, for instance, you pull that tight and then you found out you actually want them a little bit looser, because it kind of will create a gradual effect, and then you can just keep it even with the second one from there on, if you want it a little bit more open and wider. But again, you bring that out and away. Same principle, go back to the first one, bring it under and over, and then skip the next free loop and go through the second one. And you can see we're literally now repeating. So you just want to keep doing this. Try and get it as even as possible throughout, until you get all the way to the other end. And obviously you then want to kind of measure how long you want this, well, your final piece to be, because then you want to make sure to stop, because we can then cut off the ends. So just to show you how it looks as I got a little bit more done here, you can see that nice intertwining effect of the wires crossing over and under. And you could also imagine if you wanted to make it, say, tighter or more open, so it would be a little wider here, you could easily do that and adjust it to however you like. And also just tips. So when mentioned about adjusting things along the way, I do recommend that in order to also help, first of all, gauge how much you need to pull the wire tight to get this, obviously, size of the loop, you could say, as even to the others as possible. You kind of want to try and get the shape in place so you can judge that properly, because I do recommend that you need to use some chain nose pliers for this as well, because if you need to get in and say adjust the shape of the wire in here along the way, you can't really do that with anything apart from chain nose pliers. So get your pliers right in there if you need to adjust any shape or adjust how it's sitting. And also I like to use the tip of my chain nose pliers here to kind of go in at the very outer, or the middle of the loops, you could say, very outer edge there, and that can help getting them also more even and symmetrical. So it's just a few tips to adjust it along the way. Now, of course, like I said, just keep going to the other end until the length is what you need. And then, obviously, we have the remaining 3 lengths of our wire we need to attach on the other side. Now I'm starting from the same end that I started on this side here. Attach them in literally the same way, but obviously it's just on the other side of the braid. And otherwise it's the exact same technique. Work your way up and make the same length on that side as well. Now I thought I would also just show you how you can add beads to this outer embellishment. So it's the same basic technique, I'm just going to basically add beads along the way. So I've already attached my 3 lengths of 0.6mm wire here. That's the exact same way as I've already shown you. And then I'm going to start with the very first wire. I'm not going to worry about a bead just yet. I'm going to take that first wire under and over and then skip an opening and go through the second one in the outer edge there of the braid. And here I'm not adding a bead because regardless how you want to add your beads in, I prefer to not add a bead to the very first loop here, and I'll explain why. But then just pull this down to the point where you're happy with the shape and size. I just want this to be a bit tighter. And again, use my pliers to get in and adjust the shape, because I can't really get my fingers in there as well. So that's more or less the first one. Now on the second one here, I want to then add in a bead. So I'm just going to grab a bead, and I've just got my Swarovski bicones here. The very first wire now, because obviously the first one has become the last one, so I'm now going back to what's currently the first one. And you want to then add a bead to the length before I start moving it, and then let it drop all the way down to sit. And I'm going to let it go and sit so it basically stops against that loop that we just made. Now I'm then going to bring the wire under and over the other two, just like before, and I'm going to make sure that that bead stays basically in this little area. But I'm then going to bring the wire through, skip the next gap, and go through the second one. And it's now that I want to make sure the wire stays where I want it to as I'm pulling this through. So as we're pulling the wire tighter to get the loop the size we want, I want the bead to basically stay in this, you could say, little corner. So it's going to sit on the very outer edge. So I'm just going to pull this to be a bit tighter. Make the loop a bit smaller. So you can see it kind of also naturally wants to sit there. Now obviously it's up to you how you want it. Personally, I kind of like adding beads to every other of these loops. So obviously that could be why I skipped the first one, but the reason that I skipped the first one, which I would do regardless where you want to add beads, is because you can see there's no loop on this side to kind of make this little corner for the bead to sit in like it does here. So it will kind of slide down the side and not obviously be in a fixed position. So that's why I don't add a bead to the very first loop. But here I then grab the first wire to make the next loop, go under and over, skip a gap, go through the next one. Now if you want to add a bead to each loop, then obviously you want to add a bead to this one before we brought it through here. But that's completely personal preference. Like I said, I just kind of like adding them on every other one. It just adds a lovely bit of sparkle here. Don't need too much of it either. Just get a nice balance, but it's completely personal preference. Adjust the loop however you need to. Just tighten it up a little bit more. And then, like I mentioned previously as well, you can take your pliers. Obviously you can't do this where the bead is, but where there's no bead, and go through that kind of outer gap a little bit to help make them more even. So just keep adjusting it until you're happy. Something a bit like that. Now because the one I just did was without a bead, That means the next one I'm going to add a bead. So I'm going to do that before I start moving the wire. So grab your bead, let it drop all the way down here, and again it's going to stop up against the previous curve or loop that we made, which is where we want it to sit. So I'm going to bring the wire under and over. I'm going to skip a gap in the braid, and then I'm going to go through the second one and then bring the wire through, tighten it up, and then we can start to see we get this loop created. Now again with a bead, and then it's just adjusting it until we're happy with how it looks. In relation to the other ones as well. And that's basically how you can add in beads as well. Like I said, I'm doing it on every other one, but you could easily do it on each one if you want to. And also you can make it look very different depending what beads you're adding. I'm basically just adding these beads here to add some sparkle, because you can see they're very similar, more or less like the wire color, but you could easily add some color to add some color to this design as well. So some colored beads of some sort. That's completely up to you. So now I made it all the way to the other end there on both sides, and you can see we get this lovely laced edge effect all the way along, but with the braid running through the center. So now on this side here, basically what we need to do now is just get rid of our wires, because we completed the braid and also the embellishment. So obviously we want to get rid of the excess lengths. So where we've ended up is I did my final embellishment there on both sides. And then we need to kind of secure these wires before we actually cut them off, because we don't want the embellishment to start kind of coming undone while we're wearing it. So what we need to do is basically a bit like we did in the beginning, where we went through twice before we started making the embellishment. So up here, I'm just going to do one at a time. You can see this one here is the bottom one, the wire, and that's coming out from right there, and it's only going through that one loop on the edge of the braid right now after the embellishment. So what you then can see is we do have another loop free before the next one that's then full of another wire. So I want to get to that, so I'm going to come up in the gap here on the side. So just bring the wire up through there just to get it to the front of the braid. Just make sure we avoid any kinks. Get it all the way through. So the wire starts to loop around the side of the braid. And just make sure before we continue, double check that that embellishment part is still in the place that we want it, so it hasn't moved. And then you get the edge at the very end of the wire there, and you simply just want to feed it through the next open loop there. Again, if you need to, we can just use some pliers to help us along and feed it through again from the front to the back. When it comes out of the back, grab onto it and pull, because what you'll then find is that it's going to nestle and basically follow the path that's already there on the edge of the braid. And just pull it nice and tight. So like that. And of course on the other side you want to do the same thing with that bottom one. The next one here is the next one up. So this one I'm done with for now. The next one, the same principle. I just want to get it through the gap there, the embellishment, to get it to the front. So that I can then bring this wire through the next gap in the braid that's available. Again, that's before the very final one that's occupied. So just, again, if you need the pliers, it can be quite helpful just to kind of feed the wire through. So just find that gap and get the wire through to the back. And remember just to double check that the embellishment is still how we want it, and otherwise pull tight. So make sure it's not loose like this. Pull it tight so it's gonna really nestle around the edge of the braid there and blend in more or less. And the final one, we literally just bring it around the side and get it through the next loop available. We don't have to worry about any of the embellishment. So find the loop and the gap in the edge of the braid, and then just pull it through, because we want to make sure to do it with all of them, and then just pull that nice and tight. You can also help push a little bit like this if you need to, just making sure it's as tight as possible. So I've now done all the ones on this side. Of course you want to repeat on the other side in the same way with those. So once I've done them all here, I'm going to just flip it to the back because that's where the wires are coming out from. And then I'm going to get my flush cutters, and I just need to cut off the excess, but I want to make sure to just leave a short little tail of the wire. So you can see this wire here is coming out from the side. I'm not going to cut it as far down as I can where it's coming out from. I'm just going to make sure to leave a few millimeters of length. Not too much either though, but rather cut off too little, because you can always cut off a bit extra. And basically, I'm just going to do the same with the others. So again, just a short little length left. Now this top one here, what I'm going to do is just bring it around the side a bit before I cut it off. And then I'm going to go down and cut off the excess like this. And now I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, because then these little ends, they are kind of sticking out a bit. So I want to make sure that I push them down, and basically almost as if we were going to go around one more time for the next loop around the edge. But obviously because that loop is occupied, I've just cut it down so this short little length is going to nestle in. And basically continue around the edge a little bit, but only just until there's no more space really. And this top one, just bring it around the side and then just squeeze it in place. So they're now all laying around the edge of the braid. And of course you just want to do the same with the other side as well. And in principle, once you've done that, down here on the bottom, we have all the short little ends where we started out when we attached the wire for the embellishment. So I'm just going to kind of bring them back up. You can see them better. Because we've already gone an extra time around when we attach them, so we don't need to do that bit here, but obviously we just want to get rid of the excess. And it's the same principle. You just want to make sure that when cutting them off, there's just a short little end left. And this one, and the last one is going to go a little bit further around the side, and then you can cut off the excess like that. And remember to push them into place so there's no end of the wire that's kind of sticking out and can catch or scratch on any clothes or skin. We obviously want to avoid that. So squeeze them into place, get them out of the way, and again repeat on the other side as well. And then once you get rid of all these wire ends, we just need to finish off the actual braid itself. So to finish off the ends of the braid, I'm going to get my heavy duty flush cutters here. So I need to cut off obviously the excess braid. So what I'm going to do is go in and start cutting where the wire for the embellishment finishes. And I just want to cut across the braid so I get a straight line across, a straight end. Now I just start in one place, do a bit at a time, and gradually work your way across to the other side until we get a straight line. This is a little bit crooked, so I'm just going to cut a little bit more off on that one side until it's a bit more straight, like that. And of course you just want to do the same on the other end as well. So now the ends are cut here, I can add my ribbon ends so we get that nice finish, and also then that loop to attach our findings. Now obviously this is metal on metal, so it's not just going to clamp and hold, so therefore what I'm going to do as well is use some glue. So this is my E6000. Highly recommend using that for something like this. And I'm just going to use a toothpick to help apply it. So this works really well on metal. Just get rid of that. So I just want to get a bit of glue onto my toothpick. Doesn't have to be too much because these are only some small ribbon ends, and also obviously the braid is going to go inside, so whatever's too much glue is just going to come spilling out as we clamp it down. So I've added my glue, and then we just need to get it inside of the ribbon end, making sure to cover the sides there on the inside. Like I said, we don't need to fill it up, so if you look from the side, we don't need to fill this whole thing with glue because the braid is going to go in there. But then what I like to do as well is what I have left on my toothpick, I like to just put on the end of the braid itself and just make sure I get it in between all the wires there, just right into all the nooks and crannies, because when we then put the two pieces together and the glue dries, it's going to really make the bond nice and strong and much more secure long term. So something a bit like that. Then I'm going to add my ribbon end over the end of the braid and hold onto the braid in my hand like this. I like to then put a finger on either side to kind of stabilize it, because as I'm clamping it down it might kind of slide around a bit. So just gently start using your flat nose pliers, clamping it down, and like to go from side to side a bit at a time. And then as you can see, it's going to be moving around a bit. So before I do my final clamp, make sure it's in the middle, and then I put some force into it so it really clamps down around the braid. And then also make sure you push it down as far as it'll go. And I like to also just go in from the sides to kind of close them up as well. Now as you can see, it's slipping around and it will come off, but that's because the glue hasn't dried yet, and that's why we need the glue, because this is just metal on metal, so it wouldn't just hold. But once this glue dries, it will be a nice and strong bond. So something like this, make sure obviously it sits straight as it's drying, and then of course we do the same on the other end. And then once they've dried, we have these loops we can attach our findings, and then we just have to shape it. So to shape the bracelet, you can either shape it around something like a bracelet mandrel or anything you have handy, or you can just use your hands and fingers. So that's what I'm going to do here. So first of all, I just want to make sure that I have the front of the bracelet is going to be facing outward and away from the wrist. So this is the back. You can kind of feel the difference. This is a little bit more raised with the braid, and this is a little bit more flat. So this is going to be the front. Obviously it's up to you, personal preference, but what I'm just going to do then is go in and start putting a curve into it just moving gradually from side to side. So don't go into one place and just do a big bend, but put a gradual curve, a little bit at a time, back and forth. So the two ends basically start getting closer and closer together, because obviously that means we can then use the clasp. So just keep going like this. As you can see, we're getting the shape more and more in place. And I personally prefer to make it more of an oval shape. I feel it sits better on the wrist. But again, that's personal preference. So just keep going until we can use the clasp. And then the bracelet is ready to wear. So you get this really cool effect of the braid running through the center, and then that laced effect on the edges. And of course you can mix your colors how you want to, and also you can add beads or leave it without beads. Now if you like making wire Kumihimo designs, I do actually also have a book full of them. So what I'm going to do is leave a link to that in the description box down below if you're not already familiar with it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.